Hello again, I'm Caitlin Sheffer from Emerald and Ivy Studios, and I'm bringing you a new class today all about illustrating on top of your watercolors. It's a super fun exercise. I love to do it when I'm feeling a little burnt out from my normal work. I just want to change things up, try something new. I think it's really fun and you guys are going to love it. So you're just going to need your watercolor supplies. Or an already finished watercolor painting. For example, I did this a few weeks ago and I'm just going to use this, but you can do a fresh watercolor painting, let it dry, use that. And then you'll also need a drawing pen. I like to use these Tombow Mono Drawing pens, but any designated art drawing pen will be fine. So anyone can do this project. Okay, so now that we're up close, you guys can see that two of these greenery paintings have some ink already added onto them, and then the rest of them are still just regular watercolors. And you can also notice, just an anecdote, that this is some new paper I'm trying out. Last week I talked about some of my favorite art supplies, but I just recently tried out this handmade paper that I had shipped to me from overseas, and I really love it. I love the deckled edge. It's a little more rough than I'm used to working with, but it's absorbent. It didn't buckle at all. The paper in and of itself is a little bit shaped more organically because it's handmade, but it's beautiful and it worked really well, and it was just a nice little change up. So I will link that for you in the description below if you're interested in trying that out. And then for this activity, I'm going to be using these Tombow Mono pens, and I have a variety. I bought a 3-pack, so I have a size 1, 3, and 5. And the thing, it's pretty simple. The larger this number is, the second number, the larger your nib is. So if you can see this is a size 1, and it's pretty small. And I'll show you in comparison the size 3 and the size 5. So here's the 1, the size 3, and the size 5. You can see that, I'll show you against the white. The nib sizes just get larger as the number increases. Now, when I'm working on watercolor paper, which is a rougher paper, even if you're using a pretty smooth cold press paper, it's going to be rougher than a typical, smooth piece of paper. And I find that when I use the size 1, it's just a little too small. It can't handle the tooth of the paper, the texture. It's just, it skips a lot. It's just, I prefer to use a larger nib when I'm using a rough paper like this. A 5 would be good for a super, super rough paper. It just depends on the look you're going for. I'll show you really quick before we get started. This draws a pretty thick line compared to the size 1, which is very thin. I mean, you can hardly even see it. And then the size 3 is kind of like the perfect in between for me. So I'm going to be using size 3 for this activity, but you're welcome to use whatever you like aesthetically the best. But the general concept for this activity is to give you something new to try with your watercolors. Like I said in the intro, this is an exercise that I did a few weeks ago. I was using it for some I was filming a video and I just needed to get some quick sketches down. So they're already dry, which is perfect for me to go over on top of them with my pen. Now these pens are not water soluble, so technically you could go over if it was a little bit wet and it wouldn't bleed, because I specifically bought a pen that won't bleed. But if you're using a pen that does bleed with water, you're gonna wanna make sure that your watercolors are super dry, or you'll have a bleeding effect with the ink. Okay, I've zoomed in a little bit for you so that you can see up close better. But I'm gonna go ahead and go over this kind of fern type of leaf we've got going on. And the reason that I really like adding ink to these paintings is because, as you can see, this was a quick, loose sketch for me when I was painting this. And there's pretty much just one color. There's not any shading. You can't really, there's not a lot of depth to it. And so adding in ink on top gives it more dimension and depth. You can add in some shading you can want. You can have it be super detailed or loose. It's really up to you. Here's an example of this silver dollar eucalyptus that I did. And I kind of just, I like this sketchy look where it's not necessarily, I'm not tracing, I'm not just going over and tracing each line, which you can do. I mean, that's definitely a style. I want it to be more loose and sketchy, like a botanical drawing. Okay, so you can decide what you like. If you like this very modern, very literal translation of like tracing of each leaf, you can do that. That's totally fine. I'm gonna be going with this looser, sketchy look. Okay, now I have my size 3 Tombow Mono pen. And this pen does not bleed when it's wet, so you could technically lay down a sketch and then paint on top of it. I'm just going to be drawing on top of dry watercolors because I did this last week. So let me just show you how I get started and we can talk a little bit along the way. So I have this nice shape. It's pretty much just one color, one value. And I want to go in and just sketch in a little bit of a shape on each leaf, keeping it loose. I'm not just doing one long line. I'm just kind of keeping it sketchy, pretending like, I had a pencil in my hand and I'm just giving it a little bit of an edge each shape. Okay. So that's as simple as it is. You can go in with the stem if you want. And if you wanted to get more detailed, you could even go in and add some veining on the leaves. Okay, so that's just an example of how you can go in after the fact and add in some ink to give it more of a sketchy look. Let's go ahead and do it again over here with a different type of leaf, different shape. Okay, and I am gonna go ahead and show you how it looks with a size 5 because it's a lot fatter and it's gonna be a thicker line. Let's see how that looks. Okay, I'm just gonna start at the top, bring it down. I kind of like to do these C curves when I'm drawing. Feel free to turn your paper as needed to make it easier. Okay, don't be afraid to go outside of the lines. That's what's part of the charm of it. So this is the center of my leaf where there's this little bit of white negative space, same down here. So I know that the vein is going to go right down the middle, whereas with these leaves right here, they're folded, so I only drew one direction of the veins. Right here you can see how I did a little bit here, and you can see the other side of the leaf just barely, but these are all folded in half. This one is almost like a bird's eye view of the whole leaf. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw down the center as if that's where the vein, if you folded it in half, it would fold along this line. And then I'm going to add in and you can see how I'm just pushing ever so slightly, And because of the texture of the paper, it's skipping a little bit, which I love. I like the charm of it. If I were using my size 1, it would skip even more. So I think after trying all 3 sizes, this paper lends itself well to the 5. But in general, I usually use a 3. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on this one. Come down the line, down the center, midline. Okay. So you can see how adding in this ink, a little bit of ink, gives it more detail, more dimension, more depth. Let's do one more. Let's do this one. This one's fun. Right over here. I'll zoom in for you. Okay. Now this is kind of reminds me of a willow tree. It's not quite a willow leaf shape, but it has this drapey effect. I love it. And everything's just kind of flowing down. There's really not a lot to this. It's not like I'm doing anything a certain way. I'm just literally tracing the edges in a very loose, sketchy way, which means I'm not really rigid, I'm not tight, I'm just very loose, following the shape very loosely, lifting my pen up and down. Okay, just as if you were sketching with a pencil. I think it's very charming when you get these little, this ink outside of the, but that's just me, you might not like that. I'm just gonna do a little bit. Imagine where, looking at the leaf shape, I'm going to imagine where the midline of that leaf is. So on this leaf, it looks folded to me, and I'm gonna put the midline kind of about right here, the center. This one looks about dead on, so I'm gonna have it be right here. This one is a little more to the side. This one's a little more this way. So follow the natural shape. Don't just put everything right in the middle. You want it to be authentic and organic. Okay. Okay, beautiful. I love that. So you can see some of the contrasts still because I left a few of them without the illustration, and they're all beautiful. I love everything on this page, but I do think that these with the extra ink on top just give it a little bit something extra. It's different from my usual style, and it's really important that you branch out as an artist to stretch your skills, okay? So let me show you another way you can do this activity. Another way you can practice watercolors with ink is to sketch something first and then add your watercolors on top. So I generally do this way where I have my watercolors first and then add ink, purely because I'm not much of an illustrator. I don't spend a lot of time sketching things out first. So for me, it makes more sense to do it this way because I have tons and tons of dry watercolor paintings that I can go in and add detail to. But you can do it this way as well, where you add in the sketch with your ink first and then go in with some watercolors. The only thing you need to know is that if you do it this method, you need to make sure you have a waterproof pen or something that's not soluble in water. So I know these pens hold up really well when I put water on top of them. Now, I have had drawing pens in the past that I'll put down my sketch and then go in with watercolor on top, and it just bleeds everywhere. So I would make sure if you're starting a new project, do some test patches and make sure that your pen's ink does not bleed into your painting. I also like the Micron brand. It's fine. I've liked the Tombow one a little bit better, but Micron is easier to find in local art stores, craft stores. I had to order this on Amazon, but both brands are fine. Okay, so I'm just going to let's just see. I'm gonna just do, since we're already working with leaves, I'll do kind of like a fern type where I've got these long skinny leaves that branch off at the same point. Okay, now this goes for anything. So you could be drawing a car, you could be drawing a cat, you can be drawing flowers, whatever you want. It's just this concept of laying down the ink before you get started. Okay. Now I could, it depends on how much detail you want. I think I'll just do a midline for these. Okay. But you can, it could be seriously as detailed or not detailed as you want. It's totally up to you. Okay, so here's something. I think I'm also going to do, this is kind of random, but I'm a fall girl and fall is in the air. So I think I'm gonna do, see if you can guess what it is that I'm drawing. You guessed a pumpkin, you're right. Okay, cute little pumpkin shape. What else could we do? Let's do some berries. We'll do a little stem. Okay. All right, so we have some berries, a leaf, and a pumpkin. Let's go ahead and get started adding in some watercolors to our illustration. Now these are pretty small, so I'm going to be using a small round brush. This is my a 0. I also have a size 2 I can use. But let's get started with this one. And I'm just mixing up my palette, mixing up a green that I already have going on. Okay, so I'm going to start over here. And just as we talked about with the first exercise where the pen would sometimes come outside of the painting, it's okay if your watercolors come outside of the drawing, just like I did right there. That kind of makes it have like a more of a whimsical illustration quality. I tend to like that. If you're very, very literal, exact, that's fine too. Everyone has their own style, and you can find that by practicing more and more every day. Some of the best advice I was given was, how do you find your personal style? The advice that I was given was to literally just create art every day. Every day, show up, make something new. You need to be practicing every day, and that is how you're going to find your personal style. That's how you're going to increase your skills. That's how you're going to become a better artist. So try lots of different things out, and pretty soon you'll find the style that feels right to you. Okay, so I have that first layer down. Now if I wanted, I could go in while it's still wet, wet on wet, and add in a little bit of some nice little bursts of color. My first layer is pretty much already dry, so I'm not getting a lot of the burst. which is okay. You don't find a lot of things in nature that are just one color. Okay, so we have this nice, cute little illustration. This is an example of how you can do the ink first and then the paint. So let's go ahead and do our pumpkin, which, if you guys can't already tell, I'm not much of an illustrator, guys. I do a lot better with loose watercolors. So it's definitely not the most beautifully sketched pumpkin you've ever seen. We're just gonna go with it. We're a judgment-free zone, right? Just mixing up a pretty orange. Something that's very earthy and not, you know, super fake looking. So I think what I'll do is I'll actually do a little bit of a wet on wet here. I'm gonna lay down some water. I'm gonna zoom in really quick so you guys can see this. So I have some orange on my paintbrush already, but essentially I'm doing a wet on wet. I'm just gonna go ahead and get this nice and wet. And then I'm gonna add in my color, and so you guys can see it spread. There's something very soothing about doing that. It's also how you can get in some good blended colors, is just by dropping in a little bit of different shades as you're going. It looks more natural that way. It has that very beautiful watercolor effect. So I'm gonna add in a little more water over here so we can get some more. Okay. I think I'll make it a little more yellow on this side. Beautiful. It's still nice and wet over here, so I think I'll do a couple more bursts, since, like I said with the greenery, nothing in nature is just one color. So we've got some nice little natural tones for our pumpkin. Let's see if I can fix the light a little better. There we go. Okay, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and add in a little bit for the stem. Okay, and then I have my brown already mixed up. I'm gonna use this over here for the berries. Okay, and then let's get a nice berry color going on. Feeling the fall vibes. I hope you are too. Let's do another kind of wet on wet, because it is just fun to see the colors blend. Okay, let's add in that burst of color. So I think when you do it this way, where for me it's backwards, where I put the sketch down and then watercolor on top of it, you get a much more detailed, tight look, as opposed to going over on top of watercolors that have already been painted. But both are fun, both are really good ways to stretch yourself as an artist, and they both lend themselves well with watercolors. It works really well. So I hope you've enjoyed this activity, and I hope that you will share what you've done with me on social media. You can hashtag Emerald and Ivy Studios if you post something on Instagram, and I will be featuring some artwork from you guys on my Instagram account, and I can also feature it next week in next week's video. So please comment below with any questions, or if you have any ideas for content for future videos. Just let me know. I'm so excited, and I will see you guys next week.